My guest today is Omar Matadar. Omar is currently the director of Qasid Institute. Qasid is an Arabic language institute based in Amman, Jordan. I have sent dozens and dozens of students to the institute over the years. They have trained and taught thousands of students from all across the world the Arabic language. If you are interested in learning Arabic, reading, writing, speaking, whether it's for business purposes, educational purposes, Islamic purposes, Qasid is definitely the place where you should be looking and where you should be focusing on. We get into a lot of how Qasid works, how they teach their students, the philosophy of language acquisition. We also talk a little bit about running a business in the Middle East. Omar is also one of my oldest friends. I've known Omar since he was in high school because his older brother and I were roommates in college. So I've known Omar and his family essentially all my life. So I've really enjoyed sitting down and talking with him on camera. We joked a little bit before and after, but we tried to remain professional throughout this interview. I hope you find it as beneficial as I did. There are many things that I learned about language acquisition and running a business from Omar that I was not thinking about before. So I learned from this conversation. I hope you do too. Please enjoy this conversation with none other than Omar Matadar. Omar, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tarek. Nice to be with you.
Nice to be with you. Thank you for making the time.
No, thank you so much for having me.
I have a whole host of things I want to ask you, but let's start with the obvious, which is, the theme or the concept of the Arabic language, learning and studying the Arabic language. I know that you after undergrad, you spent some time studying yourself, and now, mashallah, you're running this business. We're going to get to that. We're going to get to Qasid. But if you can, I'd like to hear from you, in your journey with the Arabic language and why it's so important.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's a great place for us to start. And it's actually oftentimes when speaking to our own students at the institute where you mentioned just a second ago here in Amman, we talk about that a lot as well, just about one's own journey and thinking about where someone is right now and trying to actually kind of imagine where they're going forward. And so I do bring up my own story with that a bit as well, to give them some context as well and give them, say, a real life example of something that, somebody has done and hopefully they can actually do better than. But my own experience, oddly enough, is that, so my freshman year of college, as a part of my general curriculum requirements, I had to choose a language, and Spanish was full. So I wasn't able to get into Spanish. And so I actually chose Arabic at that time, really not of my own accord. It wasn't my first choice to choose Arabic. I really wanted to study Spanish at the time. This is pre 9/11. So before 9/11, it was very easy to get into an Arabic classroom in the US. After 9/11, it became very difficult to find a seat in a classroom for, even for first year Arabic, probably until someone say third year, junior year or so, because it was so popular at that time. So I actually took that first year of Arabic, my undergraduate, and it wasn't the best beginning. And that is not the fault of the university or the professors. They tried their best, but I didn't put in the effort that I probably should have. But oddly enough, one of the professors, Dr. Sami Muntasir, I still remember well. I think she's with the UN, or she may have retired now, actually. She, partway through the year, she actually mentioned to me the Middlebury program in Vermont. At the time it was in Vermont. They went to Monterey, California for some time. They're back in Vermont now, the summer Arabic program. And so oddly enough, in the sense that I wasn't her best student. And so strangely enough, she kind of mentioned to me, I don't know if you're interested in this program, this intensive program in Vermont. And so, she talked to me a bit about it and the language pledge they have there and how intensive it is. And I actually got interested, and she told me she'd write me a letter of recommendation. And again, this is pre 9/11, so I think even getting into Middlebury, although it was competitive, it was easier at that time as well. So she gave me that letter of recommendation. I applied, I got into the program, and I went that summer. And for many reasons, I actually consider that to be the beginning of my Arabic study. And this is something we actually mentioned to a lot of students as well. That they have these signs and qualities of successful language learners they discuss in the field of second language acquisition. We can maybe talk about those more later. But one of the most important signs and qualities they mention for someone to be successful in the future is they actually have an initial good experience with the language. And Middlebury for me was my initial good experience. I just absolutely loved it. I love the focus. I love just how much progress that myself and my colleagues who were there were able to make. Even the physical campus itself, it was just a wonderful experience that summer. And so for me, when I think about when Arabic really became a part of my life, and I mean, now it's a major part of my life, of course, but it really started to kind of enter into my life. I really put it back to that summer at Middlebury. Right after that summer, 9/11, I came back to Washington, D.C., where I was doing my undergraduate. And right after that, when I came back, 9/11 happened. And so then everything in Arabic and teaching Arabic as a foreign language really changed significantly. But I'm really grateful that I was able to kind of get in the door at that point in time and to have that experience, that initial good experience there at Middlebury, which I think really kind of pushed things forward thereafter.
So I did not know at all. Actually, this is the first time I knew that you went to Middlebury, but now I know why, because that was the summer I got married.
Yes,
So,
exactly.
okay, so that's why that summer, for obvious reasons, my focus was
Mhm.
elsewhere. Okay, so
Mhm.
you come back and you continued when you were an undergrad. You
Yeah, I
continued
did.
with
So I
Arabic?
came back. So this is my sophomore year, and I went into. I think they tested me actually into. It was maybe like third year or fourth year Arabic. It was the advanced Arabic class that we had a number of native Arabic speaking students
Hmm.
from mainly from the Gulf region studying at the university. And a lot of them were taking Arabic, I think, just basically kind of for an easy grade, and so they would always be tested into the highest levels. And I think at that time as well, even in the field of teaching Arabic as a foreign language, testing was still kind of coming along, proficiency testing and even placement exams at universities. So I must have done something, the placement interview that impressed them, or whatever credits I had, and so they put me into this particular level, which was probably higher than where I should have been.
Hmm.
So I did it that it would have been the fall semester of my sophomore year, but then I actually took a break in the spring semester. Then the summer after that, I did a program at Georgetown University, and they had an intensive summer program as well. So I did that summer program, which was also I found very useful. And then, unfortunately, actually, my junior and senior year, I took a total break from Arabic. I didn't study any Arabic at all, whether on campus at the university or outside in any sort of kind of private lessons or anything. So I had that 2-year break. And then towards the end of my senior year, I kind of, got this, I guess my interest in Arabic was awakened once again. And I wanted to actually go abroad. I hadn't actually done any sort of study abroad for Arabic for anything. And so I wanted to actually go abroad. And at that time, the main place to go, and hopefully, inshallah, in the future, it'll kind of become the main place again, was Egypt. And so, Dunya, that was the place where you go for everything. And Arabic is a second language, including. And so that was my main goal. I wanted to go to there was a particular institute, a private institute there in Cairo that I was interested in actually attending. And my brother actually was also he was studying abroad as well. He happened to be in Jordan. He had been to Amman, he came to Amman basically 9 months before I was planning on coming. And he'd been to Egypt before. He'd studied in Cairo briefly. And so he told me, why don't you come out here and just visit, see if you like it. If you like it, you can maybe come here and then just be here for, say, 6 months or so and then go to Egypt. So I came for a visit to Jordan. I liked it. I mean, at the time they referred to it, and maybe they still do, as the Hashemite kingdom of boredom. So it was a quiet place with not much necessarily going on. But there were good resources for studying Arabic and kind of get focused in studying. So I decided to come. That was June of 2004, and my plan was to be here for 6 months and then to continue on to Egypt. And so now, close to 17 years later, I still haven't I still haven't made it to Egypt, although I visited a number of times.
So at the time that you were in Jordan, was your interest in Arabic, I mean, for lack of like a better word, was it like a secular interest, like I'm just interested in the language, or was your interest also, I want to learn the language so that I can pursue classical Islamic studies to approach classical text in the original language?
Oh yeah, my goal was definitely, when I came to Jordan, my goal was definitely to be able to access classical texts. That really was my main focus. I
So
would
at that
say,
time you were like a quote unquote talibul ilm.
yeah, I would say, I mean, in terms of definitely in terms of the overall sense of kind of the goals of studying classical Islamic texts, to access those particular resources, access experts in those particular fields, and to be able to actually, gain some level of proficiency therein. That was definitely my goal. And so, in terms of actually working with Arabic in other fields, well, maybe it was kind of a secondary value that I recognized at the time. But I'm probably maybe just like thinking that backwards now. But that wasn't a main goal in my mind.
So in that moment when you were a talib al ilm, a lot of people that are going to be watching and listening to this are, tullab, and we both come from that background as well. There are two things I want to ask you about. One, do you remember, or was there a moment in time where you switched from accessing Islamic studies in English to Arabic? And can you remember? I remember that for myself, very
Mhm.
distinctly. So that's one question. And the second question that I think a lot of students of sacred knowledge, as we sometimes translate in English, a lot of times there's a crisis that they have. Like, what do I do? Like, do I keep going? Like, is there another mountain peak? Is there another scholar somewhere hidden somewhere that I can go and study these texts with? And you can just like do that forever.
Mhm.
And somebody's got to knock some sense into you. I remember having one of my teachers knock some sense. He's like, you can't just keep hanging out here. Also, you actually have to do something. So I want to ask you about both those questions. So first, was there a moment that you remember where you're like switching from English to Arabic?
That's a really good question. I haven't actually thought about it in some time. So I would say that first came in 2004. And so I studied at Qasid as well, where I currently work. And when I entered the Qasid program, I was basically what would be considered maybe a high intermediate, maybe kind of, bordering on the advanced level a bit at that time, although our levels have changed over the years, but basically kind of according to the standards that were being used at that time. And so I would say at that point, I was accessing texts on some level. And so something we also discuss a lot with students, whether it be kind of in our general introduction to language, or even when students kind of come in for one-on-one sessions to get some advice on studying Arabic, is that almost from any level of studies, any student can access any text theoretically, but according to their level.
Hmm.
So there's going to be an aspect of that someone, even at a very, very early stage of the process, can actually take an authentic text and begin to recognize things. They can recognize that, pronouns. They can recognize that something is either, feminine or masculine. They can recognize that it's in the past tense, or it's a verb in the first place, or it's past tense, or it's present tense. They can begin to engage with the text even at that kind of structural level. Because every text is going to have what they refer to as, external structure and internal structure. And that external structure, what they see physically there on the page in front of them, is oftentimes the easiest structure for us to be able to kind of use as a window into the text, into what the author intended, and then also the overall context for what they've written. The internal structure, I think that is the biggest challenge for a lot of students, and especially, like you mentioned, students who are trying to access classical text, students who are saying they've taken a particular track or route of doing talab al-ilm of classical knowledge. The big reason that's a challenge is there's this kind of double whammy that comes in front of these students. They have, on the one hand, the language itself, which is challenging. I don't want to say Arabic is impossible to learn. Sometimes it's kind of made out as this language you'll never learn and nobody ever learns it, which isn't true. But it is a challenge. I mean, it does require some focused work. But at the same time, in addition to the language itself, there's all this domain knowledge that is
Hmm.
oftentimes very, very foreign to anyone who's really studying these particular texts. Whereas on the other side, for someone for whom Arabic there is a goal, is kind of a key towards, say, studying, modern politics, economics, healthcare issues related to refugees in the region and outside the region, they have an advantage in that, they're, at least in our program, and students who are normally doing study abroad, they're adults. They're over 18 normally. They're in their undergraduate years, graduate years, so they have a liberal arts education. They've been educated. They can speak intelligently on the topic of healthcare in their own native languages. They can speak about economics. They can speak about politics.
Hmm.
And so they have mental frames that already exist for these topics.
Hmm.
They can actually engage with that already. And while I don't want to oversimplify, it's not simply just a matter of translation. They're not just using new words for it. They are learning about these topics in a different context, but they have a much, kind of they have much more assistance with these mental frames that they already have in order to be able to access that material. Whereas a challenge with those who are trying to actually access classical texts in Arabic specifically is that that domain knowledge represents a completely different mental frame.
Yeah.
So anyone you can see who's trying to access, and we see this a lot with students who are, whether they're doing it for, say, reasons of personal piety, and that's why they're studying Arabic, or people are studying Arabic for graduate studies, especially a lot of students are doing it for, say, master's, PhD in Islamic studies. They'll come to our program and want to work with our instructors on, working through classical texts. And when a classical text relates to, business dealings, buying and selling, weights and measurements, what is, for example, what alms do you have to pay on particular animals, and all these things that are there. These are things that they've never ever experienced in their life in any context whatsoever.
Yeah.
And so because of that, that becomes a serious problem. So to get to your question about, for myself, I feel like there was a gradation that happened where I felt kind of more and more comfortable. There was a time where I felt that, I started to notice myself maybe after about a year being here that I could start reading, say, extended amounts of material. What I mean by extended by that point in time is, say, 1 page, 2 page, 3 pages, where I felt like I was spending more time with the book than I was with the dictionary. So there was a transition where earlier I felt I was spending more time with the dictionary than I was with the book. And so it was actually me reading the dictionary and referencing the book, as where it became then I'm reading the book and referencing the dictionary. So I started to kind of feel that maybe after about, say, 9 months to a year of being here. But where I feel like I really had a significant jump in my own language learning, especially as it relates to classical texts, is that I actually spent a year in the Emirates. So I lived in Abu Dhabi with some family members, and I was studying privately there with a West African teacher who I'm still in very close contact with. And I had the value that he doesn't speak any, English, of course, whatsoever. And his own learning background is really this domain knowledge that we're talking about that's so foreign to me, is the domain knowledge that's actually very, very familiar to him. And the domain knowledge that I'm aware of was actually, at least at that time, was quite foreign to him. So it was this kind of opposite experience. And he was living alone there in the Emirates, and very, very kind of generous with his time and just even with his physical space. And he welcomed me into his home for a good, say, 10, 12 hours a day over the course of that year. And we just spent time not really having, you could say, classes proper, but just a lot of time of me being able to access his library. It was relatively small at the time, but access his library and just read and ask questions. And that was something for me that particular year. When I came back to Jordan after that year, I felt a difference, and I kind of noticed that difference even in my interactions with people who had known me before leaving and coming back, that they also noticed that difference as well. So that's a very long response to your question.
That's beautiful. I love this term, domain knowledge. So you've given me now a term that helps me articulate my own experience. My own experience was similar, but a little different. It was a little different in that it was sudden. So I came to al-Azhar and I was very interested in studying law and tasawwuf for whatever reason, both at the same time. And it was studying these two sort of introductory texts in Arabic in very much the same regards. I mean, of course, Egyptians are going to be more worldly than the West Africans that you mentioned, but still their domain knowledge of the quote unquote world is completely different than mine. And it was that shift, like, oh my God, I have like now a new way of understanding Islam that I never experienced in any of my classes as an undergrad. Certainly nothing remotely even similar to my Sunday school experience. And for me, I oftentimes, I mean, it's a little bit dramatic, but I oftentimes liken it to like, I felt like I became Muslim for the first time, because I started understanding this domain knowledge, these concepts in a way that were not articulated in English. And as a matter of fact, when I went to Princeton after my experience at al-Azhar, it was very difficult for me to read secondary sources because I could not find that anymore. The secondary sources were always very bare and, in my opinion, missed the mark. I mean, I think there's a lot of bad stuff written in the Western languages about Islam even till today. So that's why I asked about it, because it's something that now you've given me this term, now I can explain it. So I mean, I can go on and on, but I'm grateful for, so thank you. That's a beautiful answer. And then the second part of that question was, what was the second part of my question? Which is when you started learning Arabic and you started accessing, did you have this like crisis that a lot of us that want to study the sacred sciences have? Like, what do I do now? Do I just keep going, or when is it enough, or do I join like a seminary? How did you deal with that? That's like a fork in the road for a lot of
Yeah,
us.
that's a very, very good question. Yeah. So I think definitely in terms of for, because we have a lot of our students as well who come through Qasid have a similar, as you said, they come to that particular point in their journey and they have to make a decision as to what they're going to do with their time and also what they want to do with their life in general. You know, how do they actually want to, do they want to have a particular career? Do they want to work in a particular field? What is it that they want to do? Uh, Personally, I don't remember having that same experience, especially kind of when speaking with students. A lot of the experiences they have where they feel it's very, very stark. I have to go this way or I have to go that way. I have to make a particular decision. I have to do it now. I personally didn't actually have that experience. What really happened with me was I found that I was studying these subjects, and then I started working at Qasid in 2006, the end of 2006. So I'd come here in 2004, and then I started working at Qasid in 2006. And so the subject matter and the material, you know, kind of classical texts, accessing, you know, the classical Islamic texts, and also, you know, pre-Islamic texts, and actually kind of engaging in that particular field and that area, that continued with me. It continues to this day. I mean, that's something that I remain you know, deeply interested in, and it's something that I try to spend as much time as I can on. But I found that when I started working, that the work itself was something that I really enjoyed. I mean, I really enjoyed working with students. I really enjoyed working with study abroad programs, and so that it may have been that just kind of being busy with something that that I really enjoyed, that I didn't have the same type of, say, I don't want to say confusion. I don't want to kind of use a negative term, but say a same type of decision to make that others felt that they had to make. Because I definitely feel that's something that occurs for a lot of students who are studying this type, you know, whether we want to call it classical studies, traditional studies, whatever the kind of the term we want to use. I think one of the problems that happens that I've definitely seen over the years with a number of students is that the actual process of study, a lot is actually put on the shoulders of the student, not just the learning process. They actually have to, you know, attend class and take good notes and review at home and do exams, what it may be. But actually, even who do they study with? When do they study? What books do they study? You know, which kind of overall, say, methodology do they follow? There are all these questions that are kind of put on their shoulders that they have to actually answer. And they're the ones who are kind of directing themselves to what direction they go in. And so it's interesting. And I mean, when I go to, you know, my own university studies, when we came into the university in, you know, our freshman year, you know, we had different tracks we could choose. I mean, we had a lot of options, and university students in the United States have a lot of options. But at the end of the day, there is a limit. There's a limit in time. There's a limit in the number of majors that, you know, I knew for a fact that I was not going to go into computer engineering. I just, you know, that was not going to happen. I wasn't going to go into fine arts. That wasn't going to happen. Both of those things aren't things that I'm particularly interested in or do very well at. So even though the option was available, it was narrowed down. And I also had 4 years, and I had, you know, a parent who was not going to continue to pay the exorbitant fees for forever. And so because of that, you know, although I'm very grateful to my parents for all the support. I don't want they've always supported me, you know, with everything that I've done. But the basic idea is that when you have some of the traditional studies, there's an aspect of you can just kind of almost continue on. You can continue doing that because there isn't, say, a system that's there that's telling you that, look, you have to choose the following, you have this amount of time, and then it's over. The option to kind of just hang out and kind of enjoy the experience is really there. I mean, and you find a lot of people end up doing that. And I feel for a number of students, the crisis that you mentioned before comes to them oftentimes after a period of a lot of hanging out. They've actually spent a lot of time in the region where they've kind of just hung out a bit and, you know, enjoyed themselves, and, you know, they've gotten some Arabic and they've done some tourism.
Well,
And
I'd like to think that me and your brother, you know, stumbling our way through all of this helped you.
Yeah, exactly.
You were a few years older than you. Like, okay, maybe I don't want to be like them exactly.
And for me, I saw those guys that were older than me, and the word that I use is that they were stuck. I saw a lot of people stuck in the Middle East, stuck in Muslim majority countries. Sorry to cut you off, but just to add this point, and I saw that because, like you said, there's no map. I mean, this was completely voluntary. All of these studies that we're talking about are completely voluntary. No one's going to tell you yes or no. So you could just keep going. You can keep jumping from like one circle of studying to another. So yeah, I mean, I'm glad we're talking, because this is a real problem. And to be honest, it seems like you had it figured out early. To be honest, I still struggle with this. I still struggle, like, am I doing everything that I should be doing? Am I living up to the obligation that I have to teach, to pass on the way it was given to me? But the problem, to go back to this idea of like domain knowledge, the infrastructure also in the West, at least, isn't there at all. Like a mosque, in America doesn't want, like some super faqih or like mufti. They need like a guidance counselor.
Yep.
So when I started doing mosque work in the Washington, D.C. area, I was surprised that every month, more and more and more of my time is spent counseling, just sort of like life skill stuff, and less time on the, Qala Allah or Qala Rasulullah or like the Sharia stuff. And no one prepared me for that. So that's a problem I think exists. And I'm glad that you figured it out early. So you just started working as you were studying, and this one thing led to, and for you that was just natural. Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely don't want to kind of make a claim that I'd actually figured it out. I think it was more that there was an aspect that I found something that I was interested in, that I enjoyed, that I really wanted to do, and that kind of guided me in a particular direction. Whereas I think that some of those students, they were doing things that they enjoyed, but there wasn't the same amount of, the word that's coming to my mind is routine. There wasn't a particular system that was there. Work gives you a lot of routine, and you have to actually kind of work on a daily basis, go in, and there's, you're building in many ways a lot of different skills. And it's interesting because we're definitely talking about in the context of, say, students who are studying, say, Islamic studies, classical Islamic studies, like you mentioned, students who are interested in going back and actually working in the Muslim community, in many different levels in the United States, the UK, continental Europe, other places. And even in areas that are traditional Muslim societies, going to Turkey, going to Pakistan, going to Indonesia, Malaysia, other places. What's interesting is that you'll find even so students who are actually coming from, say, a whole host of other backgrounds with a whole host of other, say, areas of interest and levels of interest also for Arabic, and what's actually the catalyst for them studying. Many of them have a very similar experience. And so you'll find that, so I've met a lot of students who've been here that they've come abroad, they've kind of caught the study abroad bug, they've really liked it, they like the whether it be Jordan, the greater MENA region. And so they were here for a year, 2 years, and they were enjoying things. But then somehow, some way, they started getting involved with different things. That was kind of a bit of that hanging out. They joined like a running club, they joined like a music club, and so I'd meet them, somewhere, and we talk and say, I love it here, and I'm doing this, I'm doing that, and everything's great, and just like you could see like just how happy they were, and be asking me like, what are your plans for the future? Say, I don't have any plans of going back right now, and I want to be here, and things. They're really looking forward to it. Whereas say another 2-3 years go by, they get to this kind of 5-year mark, and you just see the look on their face had changed drastically. They just look just very kind of lost, and I don't know what I'm doing. And then they had all these regrets about the past 2-3 years, what they've done, and they feel very desperate. They have to somehow kind of like make this huge leap back to their home kind of place, and they feel like they've lost out on time, and their friends have been working, and their CVs have kind of gotten longer, and so all that stuff kind of coming together. What's interesting, I think, is what I've really noticed for a lot of those students, the thing kind of gathers a lot of them together, is that if the ones who come abroad, and regardless of what they're trying to study, the ones who I think have really felt most, you could say, grounded in terms of what they've done here, have achieved the most, and been able to kind of, if they choose to go back to their home countries or go elsewhere and really move forward with it, are those that there's some sort of standard that they're working towards. So the students that we find who are kind of like just absolutely focused are normally those working in the foreign service of some particular country, because they have, at the end of their 1 year, 9 months, 6 months, whatever's been allotted to them for their Arabic studies, they have an exam they're going to take. They know about this exam. They know the overall content of the exam, and this exam is going to have an impact on where they are in the foreign service, what their salary will be, how they're actually going to move. It's a very, very real exam for them. Whereas when the studies don't necessarily have that type of you could say, we talked about this idea with text having external structure. If their life doesn't have this type of external structure to it, then it's normally the minority of students who are kind of so motivated and so kind of clear in their thinking that they know, I want to accomplish 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I'm ready to go. And so once they start kind of getting, in the beginning, they're kind of enjoying the freedom and enjoying the different things they're doing. But then just a normal human experience is there's a feeling of kind of loss, loss of time. And then also that they themselves are kind of lost, that what am I doing and where am I going? And that, there's a certain panic that comes with that at that point in time.
So Omar, moving from the topic of, your personal studies more sort of into the Institute Qasid. So I'd like to learn more, and I'd like people that are watching and listening to hear from you. First of all, anyone that's ever come to me that wants to study Arabic, I think with the exception of very few people, I say you should go to Qasid. And I've emailed you many times and sent people to you many times and things like that.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And no, my pleasure. And that's because, I know you, of course, I've known you forever, but I've actually visited several times. And one of the things that struck me about Qasid is that it's professional. And I want people to understand why that's important, because in this part of the world, in the Middle East, it's very hard to find a high level of professionalism in some sectors. I mean, some sectors, of course, that exist, but in a sector like this, studying Arabic, where there's a tinge of religion and religiosity and personal piety embedded in it for obvious reasons, the reasons that we just talked about, it's very hard, in my opinion, to find that professionalism. And I've always found Qasid to be professional. You guys respond to emails, you can set up, Zoom calls or FaceTime calls with, potential students. You guys offer tours, you answer people's questions. So I feel like, okay, good, I can send people there because I know that the way that the Western mind works, they're going to find the answers to the questions that they have. So I guess the first question I have with what I just said is, how do you guys maintain that level of professionalism operating in the Middle East? Because it is, I find, a challenge and very, there are a lot of odds that you have to overcome, I think, to establish that in my work experience. So how do you guys overcome that?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. And so I would say that, it's something that as an organization, whether kind of say being in Jordan, in Amman, in Jordan, in the greater Middle East, and then also just worldwide, there are any number of challenges that we face as an organization that many organizations face that are very similar. And so that same point about, say, a certain amount of professionalism, how do we actually kind of really make sure we keep that? If I were to give a very short answer, I would say that the founder of Qasid, so Qasid was founded at the end of 2001, beginning of 2002. We don't have an exact date, but it's kind of the end of 2001, beginning of 2002. So the founder of Qasid, as a person, just as an individual, he's always really cared, just about, so there's caring about the organization, there's caring about the staff, and there's caring about the students in a general sense, but just really cared in the sense that, if there's a staff member or a student who's kind of upset and they didn't have a good experience and, things didn't work out for them in that sense, that it really bothered, it would keep him up at night. Like it was something that really affected him. And to this day, it's something that, while we have kind of a much larger organization that's there running things and whatnot, himself and other people kind of like, or you could say more like the board of Qasid are still there, very much kind of, caring about the organization, interested in how all people who are a part of it are actually kind of experiencing it. But I would just say that word, just caring, has a big impact on everything else that comes down the line. And I would say that that's something that I'm sure you've seen this as well, kind of in your own work and your own kind of training that you've done with people, then kind of teaching them about how businesses and organizations run, that company culture is real, organizational culture is real. And a lot of that, it really comes from, there's going to be people who or the founders of organizations, people in say administration, people are kind of leading an organization. But it's also there's a loop to it. It can't just be kind of one direction. It has to be something that people also who are in the organization feel themselves they're actually a part of that, and it's not simply that someone is telling them to do 1, 2, 3, but they actually see that person doing it. So to take it back to the same person early on in the organization, this would be a person who, when Qasid is a very small, and when I first came to visit Qasid, not to romanticize it, but it was basically like a one-room schoolhouse. I mean, it was in the basement of somebody's home. There was one classroom. That was the one room they had, and they had maybe 2 other rooms, one for kind of like a faculty lounge, another room to do some recordings and things. But that was it. It was a very small place with I think around 7 students at the time. When Qasid first started, it was actually a 2-bedroom apartment, and the teacher taught in one room and slept in the other. That was really where it started. But the founder of Qasid, who himself, I mean, in his own life, is a very accomplished individual. Highly intelligent, works very hard. But he would go out and get into a cab every day and he would take the lunch orders of the students and get into a cab and go to kind of different restaurants and pick up their lunch orders for them and bring them and make sure their lunch was kind of there and hot and ready for them, so they didn't actually have to kind of go out and do that because the location at that time was kind of a bit far from any particular restaurants. So that's something. I mean, he's not gaining anything from that. I mean, there's nothing that's doing that for like 7 students who are kind of in an Amman suburb, but it's just caring about people. And so I think what happens a lot of times, in that same point you mentioned about communication, about how exactly students, whether they're being responded to, whether they feel like any sort of concerns or constructive criticism, whether it be constructive or otherwise, is actually that it's going to find someone who's going to listen to it and really try to actually work through it and see where we can kind of make improvements. That just involves that person actually really caring. I feel like that's really kind of the base level that's there. And this is not to say that in the Middle East people don't care. I don't want to kind of use that as the example, because I think this is something that caring or a lack of caring affects organizations worldwide. All of us have had that experience where we go to an airport and there's we for some reason are late, or we missed our flight, or we did whatever it may be, and we come and we find there's a staff member who's there who really shows that they actually kind of care about our situation. And there's somebody else who, while they're not doing anything wrong, they just very kind of stone-faced apply whatever the policy is, and we don't feel like we've been cared for. And we may be within our rights or not, but we probably for the rest of our lives will try to avoid that airline, and we'll try to tell our anyone who asks us about it to not actually go kind of fly with that same airline. And this is something I think that it's actually an advantage you find in the Middle East, is that you can, especially as it relates to hospitality, how people how people are kind of welcomed into a family, that when the staff of any organization can see, us who are in the field of education can see their student body and others as people who are kind of coming into their home on a certain level, that aspect of caring, it really does matter to them. I mean, it really kind of bothers them, the idea that someone who's a guest of theirs would somehow in any particular way kind of feel offended. And so I think that's something that there's a significant advantage that's there, that sometimes where you don't have the same, say, strict level of, say, procedures and processes that are there in organization, that you can allow that human element to be there, which is it's the underlying driver for everything else.
So I'm glad you mentioned that, culture. What I learned is that corporate culture or organizational culture, it's really hard to fix if it's not right. And unfortunately, I've had to let people go in the past because, they were just opposite to the culture and the direction and all of that. So it sounds like, the founder figure in this equation is the key to infusing the organization with this culture of care. And then the other thing that you said that I can't emphasize enough is the importance of communication. And in the case of a business or providing a service or a product, you have to over communicate to the customer. I mean, I would go and say in anything really. I mean, if I did not receive feedback from my teachers, I wouldn't know how I'm doing. And that's one of the things that I was blessed with, is that my teachers cared enough to communicate, like, yeah, you should do this, no, you should do that. And when it comes to organized work, whether it's non-for-profit or commercial, the need to over communicate. But in the Middle East, I have found it's one of my top, probably the number one critique I have, is this complete lack of communication. And sometimes you just kind of feel like you're like moping in the dark and like you don't know what's going on. But because you guys are doing that, mashallah, it's you've been rewarded for that, with loyalty. So a little bit about the program. I know, mashallah, almost 20 years of work, or about 20 years. Where are we now in Qasid? And what can you give us a sense of, like, how many students? I mean, I know we're recording this during COVID and all of that, so that's a lot of these numbers will be handicapped by that. But generally, average, how many students do you guys cater to throughout the year? How many countries are you guys, or do students come from? Repeat, if they're repeat customers or repeat students. Can you give us a sense of like where we are number-wise with Qasid?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a very good point, that all of this is going to be kind of a pre-COVID world. And hopefully there's a post-COVID world that we can look forward to. But yeah, so that pre-COVID, in terms of our program here on site in Amman, we work on a quarter system. So summer, fall, winter, and spring. And so the number of students varies based on those quarters. Normally the summer and fall are going to be our busiest times here in Amman in general. I mean, students coming to study abroad and Qasid specifically. In the summertime, over the past few years, we've normally had, say, around 450 students with us in the summertime here in Amman.
Wow, okay, mashallah.
That's normally our busiest time. In the fall, it's varied as well, but somewhere in the range of, say, 325 to 350 students. And then in the winter and spring, it's normally closer to, say, 250 students. That's kind of where it's been over the past few years. Now, that includes students of kind of a wide range. So you have students who are coming to study with us as a part of our core program, which I'll talk about a little more in a second. And then you have students who are studying with us as part of their university study abroad. So it's a requirement for their university that they actually do a study abroad for their degree. And then you also have students who are studying as individuals or doing private classes, or students who are with us, from they're working in the foreign service, and they're whether it be their embassy or whatever kind of part of their foreign service work that requires them to get a certain level of Arabic. And so in kind of a particular range that's there as well. And then, like we spoke about before, we have a lot of students who are studying with us, mainly the students who are studying classical Arabic. They're not really doing it for their university studies or doing it for, say, work purposes, but more just personal reasons, oftentimes for, say, reasons of personal piety. So you have that particular range of students who are with us. To talk about kind of the current situation, because we've had an online program as well. The numbers I've just mentioned right now are for students studying with us in Amman. We've had an online program for around, say, 10 years now, just over 10 years.
I didn't realize it was that old.
Yeah, so we've had that program for quite some time. We had a number of different iterations with that. And so basically in the past, say, 5 years or so, we really settled upon making our online learning primarily one-on-one.
Okay.
We found that one-on-one learning online worked quite well with a lot of students, that a lot of students, they really liked that kind of focused amount of work that was there. They liked the flexibility about it and the ability to kind of continue with their studies. There were challenges that arose with, say, whether it be time zones and other things that are happening with group classes. But during the COVID experience, we've switched even our group classes online as well. And we've been very happy with kind of how that's worked out. I think definitely there are things, for the students and also for the staff. There are things we miss dearly about having an in-person experience. But there's also stuff that's happened that, as an organization, this past year, it's given us a time to really kind of come in a little bit together and focus on particular projects that we wanted to work on for a number of years, but just the regular movement of things, we haven't really been able to get that type of focus. That hopefully when we're able to actually come back to an in-person experience, that will be that much actually more fruitful for students who are able to come down that.
Okay, wow, mashallah. So you've grown tremendously since the last time I visited. You guys are still in the same location, right? Same office.
Same location, yeah. We're still the same location, yeah.
Same offices. Okay. And how big is your staff?
So the staff varies, because sometimes we have staff members who, whether they work part-time with us or and depending. So right now, we currently have around 55 teachers on staff. The kind of the largest number we get up to is say around say 70, 75 teachers on staff. But right now we have around 55 teachers on staff. And that varies from teachers who are teaching full-time, teachers who are teaching part-time. We also have instructors who they're not in Jordan, they teach with us online, so they're outside the country. You know, instructors in the United States, instructors in continental Europe. We have an instructor in Brazil, so different parts of the world. And then in terms of non-teaching staff, that also, depending on kind of the seasons, things like that, that changes a bit. But we have probably another, say, 25 right now, non-teaching staff members who are with us. So, I mean, probably the largest we've gotten in terms of staff between teachers and non-teaching staff, I think it was around 120 staff members, kind of in between all of them. But right now, we're probably close to, say, around 80, 85, something like that.
All right. And I know that one of the big, victories for you guys, mashallah, is the process of having a lot of your coursework accredited with American universities. So if you could speak a little bit about that, because I think that's also important, kind of killing two birds with one stone. I get to go abroad, spend the summer in Jordan and, get to see the sites, but that, it's all, I get credit for it with my home university.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So, I mean, so credit, especially, I mean, you yourself, having worked for a number of, just been involved with the university system for so long, you know that it's a very complicated world. Universities oftentimes, it's like each university is like its own kingdom with its own laws and its own systems in place. And so the system by which and the process by which a student gets credit can oftentimes be pretty complicated. And a lot of times the actual, say, long-term relationship that exists between organizations is what makes that process much, much easier. So we've had different ways that students can, because as a private language institute here in Amman, we're not able to cut credit ourselves. We can't grant credit ourselves, but rather it's through our relationships with universities that we have universities that have sent their students to us for a number of years. And so because of that, their students can get credit for them. We've had in the past as well. We don't have it right now, but we've had a school of record that actually, so any student that studies with us, regardless of whether they're in their program or elsewhere, they can study at Qasid, they can get credit from that particular university. Right now, we're kind of exploring school of record relationships with other universities as well. So there's kind of a range of options you can have for actually receiving credit. And that has been, it's been a very helpful process for students as well, that they know that these studies they're doing, it's, they're coming for an intensive study abroad. So if they're with us for 1 quarter, they get the credit work at their home universities, depending on what's happening with the university, because not all universities necessarily will automatically grant credit. I mean, we sometimes have to go through a process and it's applied and whatnot. But students can get a year's worth of language credit for 1 quarter's worth of study. So in say 8 to 10 weeks, they can get the amount of credit that they would actually get in 1 year's of study, 1 year's worth, an academic year of study at their home institution.
Well, just to underscore how complicated this credit thing is, before I went to Princeton, one of the things that I was told was, look, language, you have to have a European language, either French or German, in addition to an Islamic language, which for me was Arabic. And if you can knock out the language requirement by taking a reading course. So I took a 2-semester, each semester was 8 credits, so that's 16 credits at GW, my alma mater, for reading, German for reading. But I took the class as an alumnus. So I think I audited the class or something like that, so I didn't have to pay for the class. I thought I was like really being smart. So I took the class, I came to Egypt, came back, went to Princeton, totally forgot about all of this. And when it came time for me to graduate, they're like, oh, we noticed in the checklist you don't have your European language requirement. I was like, oh yeah, but I took this reading course. And when I went to GW, there was no record of it. So this was like, I was not going to graduate. I was not going to be granted. So, I mean, alhamdulillah, it came through. I had to go to like the alumni office and like some back office and found some documentation. And I felt like I was in the Middle East. I had to like run around and get it stamped. But, this is one US university on the East Coast, another university on the East Coast. And it was very hard to get those credits to, or that class to be acknowledged. So for you guys to do this, across seas and across cultures and across countries, I just want to underscore how great that is, because it's not, people that transfer inside the US, oftentimes they lose credit because one university won't recognize it from another.
Yeah. I mean, what's really interesting, and just to add to your point here, and let you finish your statement, but what's interesting, you find the departments within a university as well also have kind of varying levels of influence. And so I think you'll find a lot of times that study abroad departments have an interesting level of influence in the university, and depending on the
Interesting.
university that they're in.
Hmm.
And so, because study abroad oftentimes can be a kind of a money-making source for the university, where students are studying and study abroad. They're studying with the university. They're getting credit with the university. You're oftentimes still paying tuition, especially if they're using a particular, say, study abroad organization that the university has approved or whatever it may be. They're still actually putting finances into the university. They're still kind of going to be paying for certain credits in some fashion or the other. But they're not actually using up university space. They're not doing any number of different things that are there. And they also, that study abroad, depending on what the university is ranking, you have a lot of universities that they're not in the top 10, they're not in the top 25, they're not tier 1, they're not tier 2. And it doesn't look like they're going to be entering into those tiers anytime in the near future. And so what is kind of a real way for them to attract students to their program is to try to work on these other areas, to not necessarily, you can't compete and say that, we've been around for 400 years, because that's just a hard fact. And so if you've been around for 50 years, you can't change that. And so it's something they can't actually compete with, the Harvards and the Yales and Princetons in terms of just kind of like the age of that particular organization. But they can compete in these other areas. And I'm sure you've kind of seen this, even in the area of a kind of realm of business, where they talk about this blue ocean strategy, where there's the
man, that is my Bible. I'm sorry.
Okay.
That's my gospel. You just made music by that term. I mean, I'll let you finish the statement. I'll tell you why I'm so passionate about it. Please go ahead.
And so in terms of when you're talking about like the universities are kind of notorious for the red ocean. What is the red ocean? It is like these university rankings, and for example, like who has this, where there's fighting at each other all the time, just to get who's producing more research. And why are university professors just kind of this idea of publish or perish is because the university needs you to kind of churn this stuff out in order to kind of get their rankings up, and just in that particular area. But the universities are like, look, we don't want to engage this at all. And just because we're not going to win this particular battle, let's actually, try to look differently at what it means to actually have an undergraduate experience. And if a big part of the undergraduate experience is we actually have a lot of study abroad, we have internships, we have work experience, we have this type of stuff that's coming into it, it's basically like a business end for the university. And so because of that, their ability to actually make agreements with organizations kind of abroad, a professor in a particular department, even they're going to have to do a lot of paperwork, a lot of pushing, a lot of kind of footwork to get particular approvals that the study abroad department will be able to get much faster. Yeah. Even though the person working in the study abroad department, it didn't have to go through the same type of hiring process. And it was, I don't want to discount their abilities, but the idea is that it's a very different experience in terms of what their role is in the university. And so because of that, it's interesting in terms of like how study abroad departments, that once you have a relationship that's there, that you can do a lot. There's a lot that actually can kind of be worked towards, and you can really have people who they want this to happen. They really want this to kind of occur. Not just the idea. I don't want to make everything sound like it's just money in that sense. They really want the students. Dealing with study abroad program coordinators, especially this time right now, they really are upset that their students are not able to have the study abroad experience that they've been able to coordinate for students in the past. But just in terms of a university as an overall system, and as we've seen right now, in COVID, and I'm sorry for being so verbose here, but in terms of, as we've seen right now in COVID, that universities many of them are teetering on the edge. We had like close to 300 universities that have closed forever in the United States, and however many how many more worldwide. That an additional kind of source of income coming into the university through multiple means is really important. It's something that's significant. But let me stop there, because I know you wanted to talk a bit also about the blue ocean strategies.
Well, the reason I got so animated is that both of those books and the concept of the blue shift and blue ocean, I had an epiphany when I it was probably one of the greatest books that I've read. And when I was running the coffee business, when I was running Coexist Coffee, I realized that my misery and my depression and frustration is that I was just in this red ocean, and I needed that book to help give me the language. Just like a while ago you mentioned domain knowledge, you get sort of given me this term. That book gave me this concept, and I realized, there's a reason why my margins are like, like cents on each bag of coffee because it's a red ocean. And, what, how different can my coffee company, be? It's direct trade. Okay. Everyone's doing direct trade. It's organic. Well, everyone has it organic. Well, I know the farmers. So everyone knows, knows the farmers. And then I realized I'm never going to win at this game. And that was actually one of the greatest decisions that I did, is to get out of that business, because there was no way to win at all as a startup, as a small player. And so that was one thing. The other thing is that I realized that this is a concept for life in general, and that this idea of finding where there's no competition, izhad ma 'inda an-nas yuhibbuka an-nas. The Prophet himself said that. Don't want and covet what other people have. People are going to love you because there's no competition. But oftentimes when there's tension between people, and not to get so preachy, but you kind of elicited this. The reason sometimes people have tension is because somebody wants something from somebody else. How refreshing is it when you enjoy somebody's company? You don't want anything from that person other than the pleasure of their company. So I started realizing that concept of the blue ocean, it's not just a business concept, but it's really a life concept. And that was, I think I came across that, I want to say like 2-3 years ago. I was in Japan for the first time. So it was a very picturesque thing for me. And I've written about Japan on my website before, how important that experience was for me. And that's when I realized, like, I don't want to, fight on cents on the bag of coffee. I'm not really making any change or helping the world or anything like that. And that's when I made the decision to wind it up. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I hope people that are listening and watching, I think that's a book that they should definitely read. I usually travel with that book. I have it as an audio book as well. So I listen to it from time and again. It's a wonderful, wonderful concept. So since you kind of segued a little bit into business, one thing that I did want to ask you on record, because it came up last week when we were talking, is you mentioned to me, I think it's a quote by Bill Gates, that somebody asked him, what's one of your secrets to being productive? And he said 2 screens. I think if I remember the quote.
You mentioned, the meaning of, I don't have the direct quote. I can maybe get you the direct quote, but the meaning,
Okay.
definitely is the idea of 3 screens. So he actually said 3
screens.
screens.
3 screens. So,
yeah, 3 screens. Yeah.
To be honest with you, ever since you said that, I can't stop thinking about it. So since we're recording, we're talking anyway. If you can talk to me, because I'm always trying to get like the laptop smaller and lighter. Because when I travel and I'm on the go, it will be easier. Sometimes I'm like, maybe I should shift to an iPad. But then when you brought that up, that's like the other direction. So now you got me thinking. And I know that you're using double screens. You might even be using them now. If you can talk a little bit, I know it might seem unrelated, but it is related because it's sort of a productivity tip about the magic. You're like swearing by it, like the double screen.
Yeah, absolutely. No, definitely. I mean, so the way he described it, Bill Gates described it, is with the 3 screens, where you have that, because he was also dividing basically. So there's the space you have available. You can look at it as basically this digital canvas that's in front of you that just gives you a lot more room to work with. But also even in terms of his workflow, so for most of us, especially, for those of us doing kind of admin work or work that involves working, you're kind of working with, there's, like if you're doing B2B, or even kind of B2C, like so business to business or business to customer, on some level, if you're kind of in that admin role and you're not necessarily someone who's on the creative side of things, or it's actually kind of having direct experiences with, say, whatever it is you're presenting to your customer base, that you're going to be involved with email. I mean, email is going to be a big part of your life. And then what also happens a lot with email is that you have the email itself, and then emails, especially nowadays, are going to reference things. They're going to have links. They're going to have links to another website. They're going to have links to a video. They're going to have links to something else you're kind of working on. And so that link is going to take you out of the email. It's going to take you somewhere else. And then also you're going to have, especially depending on your role in organization, there's some sort of work that you're going to be doing. There's a document you're working on. There's a presentation you're working on, something that requires a certain amount of kind of focus. And so these 3 things, when you actually have the ability, you have your email that's open here, and then something you want to look, there's a link in your email that you want to actually look at and then connect back to that email conversation. You link it out and you can put it on one screen on this side. And then the actual work you're kind of focused on, you can have that still stable in front of you here. And so your ability that when you want to just kind of quickly reference your email, or quickly, while you're actually referencing your email, being able to look on the other side as to what the email is connecting to via link, or whatever it may be doing. And then also to kind of come back to your continued focus work, whatever you're kind of producing, just the ability to have that physically in front of you is incredible. I mean, it really changes everything in terms of how you're able to work with things. And the big part of it, and I think you'll see this a lot with, all of kind of the gurus that are out there, and the CEOs, and we're all trying to dress like them, and see what exactly they eat and drink, and people are asking Elon Musk, what does he have for lunch, and all this type of stuff that people are looking into. But really, I mean, I think Cal Newport does a good job with talking about these picker points. I mean, his big his big book about this is deep work, and just really having an ability to have just like no distractions and kind of focus in on something that's in front of you. Now, it may seem counterintuitive that having kind of 3 screens, you'd be like, well, that's not going to allow you, have all these things in front of you, it's not going to allow you to focus. But a big part of that aspect of being able to actually get into a focus zone, if I can use that word, is that you have fewer kind of starts and stops. Because this aspect of where you're trying to do work, it's like driving down a highway. And once, for any of us who've been on a road trip, once you kind of get in a rhythm, like you're getting on the highway, car's going well, you got your coffee, like the heating and cooling is good, you're in a rhythm, you're in a flow. But if you had to take that same trip and you had to get off at every exit and get right back on the highway, every time you come to an exit, you get off at the exit and get back on the highway, this process of kind of speeding up, slowing down, speeding up again, slowing down, that mental process of kind of doing that, where you have, I think the term is like attention residue. I think that's the term they use for it, where it takes you some time to actually, once you move to something, to come back to it, that process, it really slows you down. And even your cognitive abilities, actually, you're working on a much kind of lower level. And so the value of kind of multiple screens is you're not kind of opening things and shutting it and opening and shutting again, and then you kind of you have the one tift. It makes it that much more difficult for you to actually kind of do this type of focus. Like, imagine if you're working with just like paper documents. None of us, if you're trying to compare between 2 documents, none of us would keep those 2 documents in a pile. We wouldn't look at the one document and then put it under the other document, look at that document. We put them next to each other. And that's how we'd actually kind of be working with the 2 of them. Yeah. And so with these kind of multiple screens, there's an aspect of, I think back in the day, you probably remember this, like, in the 2000s, especially when Nokia phones were they were all the rave, that the biggest idea was that how small could they make this device? It just got smaller and smaller and smaller until it just became inconvenient, to actually even dial a number. So similar thing here, that when looking at with our screens, that something being small it's helpful when we travel, it's helpful in kind of putting in your carry-on, but beyond that, for actual work, having a much bigger space for you just allows us to actually have multiple things in front of us at the same time. And me personally, I definitely find that it makes it much, much easier to be able to actually do kind of just this contiguous work where I'm connecting between these different parts of what I'm doing in a given day without having to kind of just engage in a process where I feel like I'm switching all the time.
So yeah, I'm glad you said that. I definitely want to check that out. I mean, I think regardless of what you end up doing, like you said, email is a huge part of it. And even, even editing these videos and getting them on the website and advertising about them, posting, I mean, that, that does require a lot of the start and stop. I guess one's gotten so used to it that you just think that that's how it is. But I have found, because I'm an Apple user, I have found that it is very common that I'll have, my laptop, the iPad, and my phone. So I do realize why I am using multiple screens as it is, but I'm actually using it to like distract myself. So I can see how that would help. So I definitely want to take that plunge, and I definitely want to give it a try. My fear, though, is like something that you said, where I get to the point where I can't live without it. So I don't know, like, how do you travel? Like, you can't travel with all these screens. Now that I have all this recording equipment, it's like actually a big deal. If I have to go somewhere, I have to factor in, do I have to take my camera and the mics and the batteries and the lights with me? But, we're always looking to do things better. It's sort of I think a function of ihsan also, that you just want to make the work the best that you can. So thank you for that recommendation. I'm definitely going to look into it.
Yeah, no, there we go.
I think if we go longer, we'll end up talking about personal stuff. I don't think people will be interested in that. You know, I've known Omar since Omar was in high school, actually. And Omar's known me since I was, I think, a freshman in college. So we go back a long time. I'm happy that we got some good content from you on Qasid. I'm definitely going to have links to the Qasid website. I know that there's a fantastic YouTube channel on Qasid that you just shared with me recently. I'm definitely going to get people on that. I continue to recommend Qasid, but I definitely want people to learn more about it. Is there anything you'd like to close with, end with, anything that you think I should have asked that I didn't get a chance to ask or we didn't get a chance to talk about?
No, this has been great. I mean, thank you so much for inviting me and for having me on. I really enjoyed our conversation. I mean, I would probably just say that you do have probably, if there are any number of students who are interested in studying Arabic, so not specifically within the Qasid context, I think they're going to have to kind of see what exactly is the best environment for them to study Arabic and how to go about doing it. But I think there is going to be, for a lot of students who are thinking about studying Arabic or are already studying Arabic right now, that particular process can be something that is at times really exciting and at times really kind of frustrating, and at times that same point we talked about earlier in the conversation, where they kind of wonder what their direction is. Did I do the right thing? Should I have done this? Maybe I should have gone to medical school, and whatever it may be. They have those types of crises that come about. And so I definitely think it's something that students, something that we recommend that students would, I think, also kind of be find helpful, is that some of the things we've been talking about today, like some of these, we talked a little bit about some of these books and Blue Ocean Strategies and whatnot. Just briefly right now, I spoke a bit about Cal Newport, that students, I think, will find it very helpful, very useful, that a lot of those who are working in social science and those who are kind of trying to apply those particular studies to the business world, a lot of what they're actually talking about really is relevant for students studying a foreign language. And that studying a foreign language, it really requires, so you've probably seen this, I always mispronounce his name, but I think there's a book called Peak. I think he actually passed away recently, I think in the summer. But he's kind of famous for that whole 10,000 hours. I think that Malcolm Gladwell quoted him with that, if I'm remembering correctly. Yeah. But just about this idea of kind of peak performance, what it necessarily means. And probably this would maybe be the last thing kind of lead, just for students, maybe if they want to look into this a little bit more, they can.
It's like an Eastern European last name, right?
Exactly. I think it's
Eric. I don't know how to pronounce it either. I know the book and I've read it.
Eric, exactly. So the book, if people want to look into it, I mean, what's valuable about these books as well is you can find on YouTube, people have very 10-minute clips that actually kind of give you a very good summary of these books as well, if somebody doesn't want to read a given book. But something that you'll find he specifically kind of talks about, and I'll probably maybe just leave this just as a kind of a point of advice for students who are interested in studying Arabic, wherever they kind of happen to choose to study Arabic, is that we look towards this idea of, say, an immersive experience. I want to go abroad, I want to study abroad, and that's how I want to learn language. And there's a value in that. There's definitely a value in having a study abroad experience. But in many ways, a study abroad experience can actually become kind of like a gym membership. So in the sense, how, you sign up for a gym, the day you actually go and sign up for the gym membership and you pay, you actually automatically feel healthier when you're walking in the gym. You somehow, the fact that you signed up for the gym, you feel like your BMI has changed.
I did it. I signed up. Yeah.
Exactly. And so there's something about you that's actually gotten better by doing that. And so a similar thing, the idea that all right, I've signed up for the study abroad experience, I bought my ticket, I've actually traveled, here I am, I'm in country. But the real question is, and a lot of students you'll find, they'll say, should I go to Cairo? Should I go to Amman? Should I go to Rabat? Where should I go to study Arabic? And at least personally, the answer I oftentimes give them is I say, tell me what you're doing in your room when you're in Cairo, or in your room in Amman, or in your room in Rabat. And that's much more important than what city you're actually going to be in. Yeah. And so this is that point he brings up in Peak, this idea of deliberate practice. Where you actually have to have practice is not simply that I just showed up at the gym. You really need to have a plan. And that plan is more than simply the school you've signed up for or the level you're going to be in, but your actual daily interaction with the language. And what it really needs to be, and I'll just end with this, is that when students are studying, they need to look at their language learning from the perspective of preparation. So in second language acquisition, they always refer to this idea that any learning we do is always based on what they call prior knowledge. You have to have prior knowledge that you're actually building upon. Being a blank slate and just kind of filling it up, that doesn't work. You have to have some sort of prior knowledge that you work on. And even children have that. When we talk about the idea of universal grammar amongst children, and so that they have something, they're not just a blank slate. And so here that you have to build, you have to have some sort of like initial exposure. You need to attempt, you need to, based on that initial exposure, actually produce something, whether it be, spoken language, written language, whatever it may be. You need to kind of produce something. Then you need to get feedback. Somebody has to give you feedback on what you're doing. And that feedback needs to be more than simply like good or bad. It needs to be kind of good, detailed feedback that's specific. They don't tell you all the things you did wrong, and they don't tell you, they need to give you kind of 3-4 specific points you kind of work on. You take that feedback and you cycle it back into your studies. And when students are able to do this, if you have this system, and it's something to kind of loop us back to our original conversation, or the part when we first started out talking about this idea that people studying abroad, especially those who are studying, say, classical Islamic studies and whatnot, that the responsibility is really their own. If they have this system that whoever they're studying with, whatever they're engaged with, they have a preparation, an attempt, feedback, and then they loop that feedback into their own studies, they're going to be able to see themselves move forward. They're going to be able to see themselves progressing. And it won't be something where they simply say like, have I gotten better? Have I not gotten better? Am I good at this? Am I not good at this? Because isn't necessarily like an exam or a testing body that's there waiting to tell them. They can actually, with real evidence, see in front of themselves how I'm applying the system and actually getting better. So that would probably be, for just kind of like that final statement as just a piece of advice for any students who are interested in studying Arabic. Is that wherever you go, you can study Arabic very, very well in your home country. You can do it at your home institutions. You can do it in a study abroad environment, whatever it may be. But what's the most important factor is that you have this full system and that you're an active part of that, and not that we actually kind of wait for someone else to take us through that. And we always want to make sure we have people helping us and giving us guidance to the extent that they can. But we have to be kind of the main driving engine for that to really be successful.
I love it. Very good. Very good thoughts to end on. And thank you for the book recommendations as well. It's a great first conversation. Hopefully we can, maybe when things loosen up with COVID and travels open, maybe we can do a part 2, and who knows, maybe we can even do it in Amman and we can get some of the students on. But thank you, Omar, for your time. I really appreciate it. Enjoyed talking to you as usual. And hopefully we'll see each other soon.
Look forward to it. Thanks so much.
All right. Take care.
Take care.